Okay, so this video is going to show you how to work in the style of Marion Bolognese. You'll have the images of Marion Bolognese's work in the classroom for the kids to work with, and they will need the cheat sheet that they did last time in front of them just to give them some ideas and remind them how to use colours. For homework, they should have drawn out sets of features, and these will be for the practice. So they should have 2 eyes, some noses and some mouths. Claire has photocopied these so that you can give them to your kids to copy, and I've purposely left in all of the guidelines so they can see how I've drawn the eyes and gone about constructing the noses. And because they're for practice, they don't need to worry about rubbing stuff out because we're going to apply the colour over the top. So again, they're going to need their paint palette, and they're only working with primary colours, not using any of the secondary colours that appear in here, because we want the skill that we're focusing on is mixing the colours and working in the style of the artist. So first thing that we're going to do is using flat washes. So I'm going to be mixing my colours, and a lot of the imagery that Marion Bolognese uses is using quite cool colours, so I want to mix up a violet to start off with. So for speed, I'm just going to mix red with a little bit of Prussian blue, and that will give me a really deep violet to start off with, and I'm going to use that on one of the noses. Okay, so just so you can see it, those are the colours that I've mixed. So that was mixed using the magenta and the Prussian blue there. I'm just going to pop that on the top because for the moment all I'm going to use is that purple. So this is where my flat wash comes in. I think I'm just going to erase just lightly some of my drawing here. If the students have done it and it's a bit dark, it's fine. You just need to remind them next time that they'll need to draw it a little bit lighter. So we want to pick out the shading in the nose, excuse the pun, and we're going to use a wash here to do that. So I'm going to put some water over the side here and around here. So I'm going to take some of the purple, and I'm using just the tip of the paintbrush. You can see it's got just a little bit of colour on it. Resting my hand on the side, and because I've put the water on, you'll see it's starting to blend and to bleed. So I'm doing the wings of the nostril. I've come around underneath the tip of the nose, and then around to the side here, and that's essentially, depending on their light source, all of the shading that they'll need to bring in. So what they do now is wash the brush out and blend that in using water to the centre or the bridge of the nose. Here we go. So I've used my flat wash and I've blended it out so it becomes graded, and on this side I've used no colour, but they can do if they want to. It depends on the picture that they're copying. You'll need to alter the tone, so adding more water to your purple. Just bring in some shade in there. Try to avoid doing dark lines all the way around the nose because it will flatten it out, and that's not what they're aiming for. So I'm going to let this dry a little bit before I work back into it with some darker purple. So on here I'm just going to do the edge of the nose. The exercise is designed to get some control into the paint before they go on to doing their face, because It can be disheartening if you've drawn out the whole of the face. You might just be able to see it here, and then you paint it and the paint doesn't do what you want it to do. So I'm going to use yellow on this profile nose. I'm just knocking it back with a rubber so that the pencil isn't so prevalent. Okay. So I'm just going to use a different colour on this one, just because it helps me practice mixing my colours, and I can decide what colours I like to work with. Okay, so I'm putting colour all over the profile of the nose. The majority of the images that they're going to be doing are going to be from forward facing, but it just helps them to develop their drawing skill, and it makes it a little bit more interesting for them when they come to do their drawing. Okay, so my last nose is this one. Just because I'm doing it nose first doesn't mean you need to. It's entirely up to you how you do it. If you want to go eyes first or mouth first, you can. I'm using my rubber again because some of my drawings are a little bit dark and I don't want my pencil really to come through my watercolour. So I'm going to try and rub this one out almost to nothing. Just going to move this over to one side. There we go. Still got a few dark bits in there. Try and knock them back a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so I think this time I'm going to use the red because then I'll have used everything. So I'm going to put some water on first. There we go. So they can look at the pencil studies that they've done in the sketchbook for ideas of how to apply shading to the nose. But essentially it comes over the wings or the outside of the nostrils, around the tip of the nose and under the tip of the nose. And then the edge of the nose, particularly in Marion Bolognese's work, is blended out. So adding more water. If they lose control of the paint at this point, so you can see when mine is starting to blend out more than I want it to, then they can either use the lifting out technique by squeezing the water out of their paintbrush and using it dry, which will lift it back and enable it to sort of lighten it a little bit more, or they can use a tissue to dab it out. And if they add enough water to the edges, they'll get it to blend out, so it's like a variegated wash, and then that way you can blend it back into the white of the background of the face. So get them to have a play, think about what they like about it. Some of them will find it difficult to control the paint. Just encourage them to rest their hand if that's the case. So I'm going to go back into the purple nose now. And then making some of this darker. So this here is spread a little bit too much, so I'm just going to squeeze out my paintbrush. Okay, I'm going to let that dry a little bit more. So it's being patient. It's not like working with poster paint, so they're going to have to take some time over this. I don't need to dry it with a hairdryer because we're only using a little bit of water each time. I'm going to work onto the yellow nose now, but this time I'm going to use some orange. Okay, so this would be wet onto dry. I'm going to add a little bit purple. I'm going to blend this in a little. And then I'm going to put some more yellow into the nose, give it a bit more depth. There we go. So you can see starting to get some depth and tone to it now. It's starting to lift it. Okay. I'm going to work back into the purple a little bit more now. I'm using just the tip of the brush, so this is similar to Blooms. And I'm going to add a little bit of blue. And I want to make a darker colour for the nose, so I'm going to take a little bit of the blue. Sorry, I'm getting really quiet now, you might not be able to hear me. Sorry. So I'm just going to use a little bit of this to indicate where the nostrils might go. It's a bit blurry because my paper's still wet, so if I wanted to make that stronger or make it more prevalent, then I'd wait for it to dry out. So I'm just going to add a bit of water here to blend that in so it doesn't look quite so blocky. That's it, that's better. There we go. Okay, so that's 2 of my noses done. I'm just going to add some shading on this side with my paint, just blending it in. And I'm going to leave that there. I can always go back to it and build it up more once I've had a play around with it. This one I'm going to leave as it is, just so you can see how to build it up and how to blend it out. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to start on is the mouths. So that again is taking the colour. I'm going to use my red. I'm going to take some more of this magenta colour here. And this time I'm not going to add any water to my lip first. I'm going to use it as a variegated wash, and then if I want to make it lighter I can add more water as I'm going. So I'm going to take it along the inside of the lip first. I'm going to mix a little bit of purple into this to make it darker. So this is effectively wet onto wet, but using very little water so you can control where it goes. So I'm using the inside there, and then wash my brush out and blend it up into the mouth. Okay, so that's my first layer, and then I'm going to do something similar again for the underneath. So in my palette, I'm going to mix my colour first. So I'm going to pop that underneath there. Wash my brush, add a little bit of water, and then blend that in. Okay, so I can let that dry for a little bit and then I can work back into it. I might want to add some more shade in here or some more shade into the Cupid's bow. I'm not going to demonstrate the other two mouths because the process is the same, it's just that they're a different shape. So the next one, and this is probably the biggest one, is working on the eyes. I'm just going to pull this down a bit, so excuse me if the camera wobbles. Okay, so the eyes are where they're going to get to practice using the blooms, using the layers, and this is probably going to take them the longest of all the features to do. So the first thing that I'm going to do is use a flat wash. So just a quick reminder, that's putting your water down first, and I'm going to put that all over the eye. Now in this point here is where the bridge of the nose would be, so they're going to have shadows in there. So I'm going to put some water all over to get me started, and then I'm going to start using, I think, a yellow. Now I've not run my pencil out here because I want to see exactly where I'm applying my colour, but you could get them to rub their pencil out so it's slightly lighter. And I'm just going to put a flat wash. Now I'm following the shape, the contour of the eyes. I'm going to take it all the way over. The only place I'm not taking it so far is the inside of the eye. That's wrong yellow. So I'm leaving that as the white. But I'm taking this all the way over, and I'm following it as if I was coming down and under the eye socket, so out from the bridge of the nose and down. And at this point, if I wanted to, I could put some extra water in to encourage the flow of the drops, which we'll get to in a second. Okay. So I'm also going to add, using a dryish brush or thirsty, the colour to the pupil. Just need to reactivate this a little bit, because by the time that I come back to this, it'll have had time to dry. I'm not going to wet my paper first this time because I want to be able to control it a little more, and my paint's fluid enough that I don't need to. So I'm going to put that into there and then give that a couple of seconds to dry off a little bit. Okay. So while that's happening, I'm just going to go back to the mouth ever so slightly. Oh. Hopefully you can see. It's just at the bottom of the shot, so I'll just do the top of it so you can see. You've got the detail here. You might want to put some shading into the Cupid's bow in the same way that Marion Bolognese does. So I'm going to use some of the pink or the red tone. I'll put my water on first and then add the colour. And this will give some depth to the Cupid's bow and make it look more three-dimensional. Similarly, you might want to do the same underneath. If you overshoot it and it's a bit too wet, that's fine. You can just use a little tissue to lift it out. Or your paintbrush. Okay, so adding some detail to the lip to make it look more real. I'm going to use my purple. I'm just going to mix in the palette. I'm not going to use wet into wet this time. Oh, I've got a big blob of water on there I don't want. Okay, so I'm just going to bring in some detail. So I'm using my paintbrush almost like a pencil and putting the curves into the lip. I'm going to blend this in a little bit afterwards, otherwise she'll look like she's got a bit of a hairy mouth, which we don't want. So they'll have learnt this technique when they've done the pencil features, and it's exactly the same thing that you're doing here with your paintbrush. So some students might find it difficult to control this, so they'll just practice it on their 3 males that they've drawn. So I've got that there, wash my brush out and then use a little bit of water to blend it. Not masses, because you still want to be able to see some of the line that you've made. Okay. And if you want to, at this point, you can add in more colour. So I'm using the blooms to bring in a little bit more of the red. On this bit, on the Cupid's bow, I'm going to use a small amount of water and a little bit of the blue just to create a shadow. And then blend it in. Okay. You can see I've got some colour collecting here, and you can use your paintbrush to spread that back out, or you can tip your page up to get it to start to flow. Blend it in with the bottom lip. I'm going to take some more of the red, put that in here. It's really just about getting them to play, see what they like. Okay, so whilst that's drying, I'm going to go back to my eye. You can see my blues lifted a little bit, so I'm just going to blend that into the eyelid. Okay, so similar to Real Eyes, I'm going to put the shadow in at the crease here and some shading under here, because this is where you tend to get your darkest circles underneath. So I'm going to layer this up using different colours. When you come on to doing the 2 faces, they'll break this down into warm and cool colours, but for their experiments they can use whichever colours they like. Just be mindful of the fact that if you mix all of your primaries together, you'll end up getting sort of a sludgy grey colour, so you may want to avoid that. So I'm just going to start to mix these colours in here, and similarly to the mouth, if you want stronger colour, this is where you're going to use your blooms. I'm just going to push my book down to avoid it spreading. So if I lift my page up slightly, you should be able to see the paint flow. So they'll be able to lift their page up so it will flow down. Mine's lifting to the side because it's got my camera resting on the other side of it. Okay, so whilst that bit's drying, I'm going to work some more detail into the eye. So I'm going to use a thirsty brush, so nearly dry, and this is where your dry brush or your wet onto dry will come in. So we want to get some detail into that centre part of the eye. If I look close up at an iris, you see that it's not just one colour, there's lots of colours within it. So you can get them to spend some time on this, and this will help them greatly with their control. If they find this bit tricky, they could always use a colour pencil to work back into it. I'm going to add a little bit of green, so I'm going to mix my blue with some of the yellow. And again, I want a thirsty brush, so I'm not going to be using lots and lots of water with it. Resting my hand, and I'm going to bring that around the edge. Okay. So I'm going to wash my brush, dab off some of the water, and then use the tip of the brush to blend the colour in towards the centre of the eye. So I get some of that lovely detail in the iris, and it shouldn't look like one flat colour. It should be broken up slightly, so you've got areas where it's darker, you've got areas where it's lighter. In the centre, rather than using black, because it makes it very, very flat, if you get them to use the brown from their palette, and then add a little bit of the blue, it's a little bit too blue. So you get like this inky colour. That's a better colour to use. I'm just going to take some of the water out of that so it's not quite so runny. And they can use that in the centre. They'll need to layer it up. Okay. So that's the beginning of my eye. I need obviously to let that dry a little bit, because if I work on it now too much, it's going to start to spread. So I'm going to go back to adding some more of the blooms here. So I think this time, because we're using warmer colours, I'm going to go back to my yellow, maybe add some orange to it from earlier. So I get a yellow orange, so it's a good way of getting them to experiment with their tertiary colours again. I'm going to put some water around this part of the eye, and then you could get them to use a little wider brush if we've got some. If not, they can use their brush on the side, so they use it flat, and then dab that colour on. Need a bit more of it, so I'll get it to spread. That's it with a little brush. Make sure they change the water. My water's quite grey now, which is why you can see sort of a browny tinge to my orange. It doesn't look as vibrant. And then I'm going to go back into my red. I'm going to use that straight out of the tin. And I'm going to move it. As it goes. I'm going to start to bring this colour in underneath, so I start to get some depth to my eye. I'm making this part narrower. And then I think I want this to be more, so I'm putting some more water on there, And then I'm going to mix up some orange. So I'm going to take a lot of the yellow and just a dab of red. And get that onto there. And I'm going to use some yellow on its own. So I've got it quite watery. And I'm going to dot it here where I've got these colours. So getting them to play around with how the colours are going to look. I can blend them together once they're onto the paper, or they can leave them separate. And then working some more deeper colours into the actual eye itself. So I'm going to go back to my small brush now. And I'm going to be using more of the colour out of my palette. And I'm going to add a little bit of purple to that red. Because I want to do the inside of the eye. And because it's dry, hopefully it shouldn't bleed too much. So there we go, I can control it a little bit easier. And I can start to blend that in towards the edge of the nose, which is where it would join up with here. Blend it out there. Okay. So I'm going to let that dry for a bit and then I'll come back to show you the finishing.